something extraordinary is about to happen. Lok Sabha seats will be increased to up to 850 from the current 543 to operationalize the women's reservation law before the 2029 parliamentary elections, following a delimitation exercise to be carried out on the basis of last published census. Now, according to the draft Constitution Amendment Bill, which will be introduced and expected to be passed in the upcoming special sitting of the Parliament, seats will also be increased in state and union territory assemblies to accommodate 33% reservation for women in our country.
The Women's Reservation Bill has triggered a major political face-off in Parliament. What started as a push for 33% quota has now expanded into a larger debate over delimitation and the proposed increase in Lok Sabha seats. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has strongly defended the Women's Reservation Bill, calling it a historic and a transformative step in India's democratic journey.
21वीं सदी में भारत एक नए आत्मविश्वास के साथ आगे बढ़ रहा है।
The opposition has mounted a sharp and a coordinated attack on the government's approach to the implementation.
Now, the seats reserved for women in Lok Sabha and legislative assemblies shall be allotted by rotation to different constituencies in a state or union territory. Now, the bill circulated amongst the Lok Sabha members has said, besides other provisions, the bill also seeks to amend Article 81 of our Indian Constitution. And it states that the House of the People, which is the Lok Sabha, shall consist of not more than 815 members, chosen by the direct election from territorial constituencies in the state, and not more than 35 members to represent the union territories, chosen in such manner as Parliament may by law provide. Now, in this, the expression population, according to the bill, means the population as ascertained at such census as Parliament by may law determine, of which the relevant figures have been published. Now, as of now, the figures of 2011 census are available. The 2027 census exercise, which began on April 1st, is ongoing, and the government plans to bring a constitution amendment bill, a bill on delimitation law, and an enabling bill to apply the proposed law in Delhi, Jammu and Kashmir and Puducherry, 3 union territories, with the legislature on Thursday, that is April 16th, 2026 in Lok Sabha. And it is being done to fast-track implementation of the Women's Reservation Act of 2023. Hello, my name is Preetpal Singh, and today our topic of discussion would be centering around women's reservation in Indian polity. Our Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji has said that this week that amendments to the Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam should be passed in the 3-day special sitting of Parliament beginning April 16th, and any further delay will be unfortunate and a gross injustice to the women of our country. Our democracy will become stronger and will become more vibrant if the 2029 Lok Sabha elections and various assembly elections that year are held with the women's reservation fully in place. This is what our Honorable Prime Minister has to say. And according to the statements of objects and reasons of the draft Constitution Amendment Bill, the next census and the consequential delimitation exercise thereafter will take considerable time and thus delay the effective and dedicated participation of women in our democratic polity. Which is why passing this particular amendment bill is at this juncture very, very critical. And hence, the objective of the proposed bill is to operationalize the 1/3 reservation for women, including women belonging to the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, in the House of the People and the legislative assemblies of the states and the NCT of Delhi and the union territories through delimitation exercise, which is to be undertaken on the basis of the population figures of the latest published census. Now, this reservation of the seats for the women in Lok Sabha and the legislative assemblies will end after 15 years from the commencement of the Women's Reservation Law of 2023, unless Parliament extends the period for such further time as it may specify in this behalf. Now, in September 2023, Parliament has passed, as we all know, Women's Reservation Act, which is commonly known as Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam. Now, it marked a very significant step towards enhancing women's representation in the legislative bodies in our country. And the act provided for the reservation of 1/3 of seats for women in Lok Sabha and state legislative assemblies. Now, the amendments to the Women Reservation Act, when passed, will ensure an increase in the number of Lok Sabha seats to around 815, of which 273 will be reserved for women. And the provision to provide a 33% reservation to women in Lok Sabha and state legislative assemblies was brought by amending the constitution in 2023. Now, if you talk about the current law, under the current law, the reservation for women would not have become enforceable before 2034, as it was tied to the completion of the delimitation exercise post-2027 census. In order to implement it from the 2029 Lok Sabha elections, changes were needed in Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam. And hence, the government is holding this special sitting to pass the amendments to the law. Now, in 2023, if we talk about that year, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, as we all know, they both passed the Women Reservation Bill. And the bill reserved 1/3 of the seats in Lok Sabha, in state legislative assemblies, and Delhi Assembly and the union territories. And this will also apply to the seats reserved for scheduled caste, scheduled tribe in Lok Sabha and state legislative assemblies. But what we need to understand is that what is the background and what is the need for this particular bill. See, till now it is very clear for us that why this particular bill is required and why this particular amendment at this juncture is required so as to operationalize this 33% reservation by 2029 elections. That is very much clear to us now. But let us now understand the background. See, the discussion upon a reservation of women. Reservation bill is prevalent since the tenure of our former Prime Minister Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji. And from the year 1996, as the then government lacked a majority, the bill could not have been approved altogether. And earlier attempts at reserving seat for women have been numerous. The first one which we could see was in 1996. The first women reservation bill was introduced in the parliament back then. But then in 1998 to 2003, the government tabled the bill on 4 occasions, but the government failed. And then in 2009 again, the government tables the bill amidst the protests. But in 2010, the Union Cabinet passes the bill and the Rajya Sabha passes it as well. But in 2014, the bill was expected to be tabled in Lok Sabha, but eventually couldn't happen. So now in 2023, the bill was actually passed, and in 2026, we are now going to operationalize it so that it can become effective from 2029 onwards. See, many people are asking this question that what is the need of such a reservation and what is the need of such a bill? See, there are 82 women member of parliaments in Lok Sabha, which is around 15.2%, and 31 women in Rajya Sabha, which is 13% of the total number. While the number has increased significantly since the first Lok Sabha, when the women's contribution or women's share was just 5%, but is still far lower than in many countries. See, while the number has significantly increased since the first Lok Sabha, when it was 5% of the total share, but is still far lower than many countries. See, according to recent UN Women data, Rwanda is having 61% of proportion of women representation in the parliament. Cuba is having 53% representation. And these are amongst the top countries in the women's representation in the world. See, Bangladesh is having around 21% women representation, and Pakistan is having 20% women representation as well. And now these countries are ahead of India in case of female representation. And the current state and status of women in Indian politics is not very good. When we talk about voters, see, as voters over the past 6 decades, the gender gap in the voter turnout has steadily declined. We are very sure with that, but indicating a profound transformation in India's electoral landscape. See, in 1967 Lok Sabha elections, male turnout was 66.7% and female turnout was 55.5%, a gap of 11.2% points. That slightly increased to 11.8 points in 1971 due to structural barriers like low literacy and restricted mobility. Now, over times, with improvements in education, awareness, political outreach, and mobility, the gap had steadily declined, reaching about 1.5% points by 2014. And in both 2019 and 2024 general elections, women voted at almost the exact same rate as men, which was around 66%. Now, when we talk about several state assembly elections since 1980s, female turnout has even surpassed male turnouts, and which is why women as voters, they are turning out really well. But when we talk about political campaigns, now although voter turnout between men and women has reached near parity, campaign level participation still shows a gender gap which is wide. Between 2009 and 2014, women's attendance at election meetings and rallies increased from 9% to about 16%, while participation in processions and door-to-door canvassing, it rose from 5-6% to around 11%. Yet men's involvement remains roughly double. So in case of political campaigning, women's representation in politics is not very great. And now let us talk about representatives. See, despite voting in record numbers, women remain largely excluded from the corridors of power. The 18th Lok Sabha has only 74 members, 74 women MPs, which is 13.6% of the 543 seats. And this is a drop from the 17th Lok Sabha, which saw the highest ever representation of 78 women MPs, 14.4% representation. See, Indian figures, as I've already told you, they are far below the global average of roughly 26%. So the global average is 26%, and India's average is around 14%, 13%, approximately that. The average representation of women in state legislative assemblies also, it continues to hover around a dismay percent of 9 to 10% only of the total strength of the state legislative assembly. And the bright spot remains at the grassroots level, where the women constitute around 44% of the representation in the local self-government institutions, which is of course supported by reservation provisions under the Panchayati Raj institutions, PRIs. See, now since we can very clearly state that the position of women is not really great, very quickly let us try to understand what are the barriers which are limiting women's political participation. And the first and the biggest amongst them is the institutional and the structural barrier. See, political parties, they act as key gatekeepers and often deny women tickets, citing winnability, despite evidence that women candidates often have comparable or higher success rates, and candidate selection and party decisions occur within a male-dominated informal networks, limiting a women's access to the leadership roles. And even when elected, women are frequently assigned soft ministries, example women and child development or culture, rather than key portfolios like home affairs or defense. And not just these structural barriers, but there are economic barriers as well. Electoral politics is highly capital intensive, creating a disadvantage for women who generally have less access to property, wealth, and campaign financing. And women are often excluded from political donor networks and business funding circles that support electoral campaigns. And this is also one of the major barriers. And other than this, there are socio-cultural and patriarchal barriers as well. See, patriarchal norms continue to divide society into public, which is male, and private, which is female spheres, discouraging women participation from entering the politics. Now, the burden of unpaid care work and household responsibilities limits time for political activities, and in some cases you will see proxy representation also occurs. Example, the Sarpanch Pati phenomena, where a male relative influence or control elected women representatives, and which is why there's a hostile political environment as well. The presence of violence, intimidation, criminalization in politics, it discourages women participation to a very great level. And female politicians often face gender attacks, character assassination, and online harassment, including threats and digital abuse, which creates a very big psychological barrier to political engagement. And not just this, but there's a capacity and pipeline deficit as well, where women are often excluded from traditional political pipelines like student unions, activist networks, and lack of mentorship and leadership training limits their political capacity. But still, we as a country have promoted and come up with several initiatives to promote women's political participation. And one of the biggest is this Constitutional Amendment Bill, which is going to come, and the earlier Women Reservation Act of 2023. And not just this, but if you see the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendments as well of 1992, it mandated 33% reservation for women in Panchayati Raj institutions and urban local bodies. And more than 20 states such as Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Kerala and Gujarat, they've increased this quota to 50% also. And as a result, India now has 1.4 million elected women representatives at a local level. That is one. And second, which I was talking about, was the Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam, which is the Women Reservation Act of 2023, which is the Constitution 106th Amendment Act, which provides 33% reservation for women in Lok Sabha and state legislative assemblies, implementation of which will begin after the census of 2027. And delimitation, and then the provision will operate for 15 long years. And not just this, but Election Commission of India has also come up with several initiatives like systematic voter education and electoral participation program, introduction of Sakhi or pink polling booths, which is managed entirely by women, or also special voter registration drives focusing on first-time female voters and women who migrate for marriage. All of these initiatives have been taken by Election Commission of India. See, women in India have moved from being silent voters today to active political participants, reflecting stronger grassroots democracy in our country. However, real progress, it requires going beyond voting to greater representation and decision-making power. And this calls for effective implementation of this Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam. Also, party level reforms needs to be done, and the removal of structural and patriarchal barriers needs to be done, and making women's leadership essential for inclusive governance and for Viksit Bharat needs to be done altogether, so that equal participation of males and females could be seen in political center of our country as well. I hope you gained a new perspective from this session. Do let me know what are your views surrounding this. All the very best and have a beautiful day. Thank you.